The gods, the sea, and death himself conspire to lure our heroes into the Shadowlands, but they follow their true mistress, adventure. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I am your host Liam, aka Hemvar, and today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of Fritz Leiber's Swords and Ice Magic. Swords and Ice Magic is a 1977 novel and book 6 of 7 in Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd the Grey Master saga. It has several stories in it, and the first one is The Sadness of the Executioner, which was originally published in 1973 in Len Carter's Flashing Swords #1. This is a very interesting story, as Death has a quota, the figure, has a quota of 20 souls to reap to gain in the next 20 seconds. Among other people, he needs 2 heroes, and so aims for Fafhrd the Grey Mouser, though we know this won't work, of course, since they're the protagonists. 2 other heroes, rather than our anti-hero protagonists, get their death. Death is an interesting character, and this is just as funny as I expect from the duo. There is rape. It's not really explicit, but it is oddly lighthearted in a way, actually, in the story. But man, I felt like the story was actually masterfully crafted, and it's really, really short. But I mean, this is Leiber we're talking about, who is a grandmaster. So there's also Beauty and the Beast, which came out in 1974 in the book of Fritz Leiber. This is a tiny story. It's 3 pages. It's mostly, a beautiful young woman is being followed by the duo. She is half light-skinned and half dark-skinned, split right down the middle. There's some odd magic and swift combat occurs before the 2 go off to drink at the Golden Lamprey. And then we have Trapped in a Shadowland from 1973 originally. In the November 1973 issue of Fantastic. This is essentially a sequel to The Swords of Lankhmar, so probably should have been first in the collection, since they're supposed to be in chronological order, but I don't know what happened there. It doesn't really hurt to have it here, though, either. This involves the Shadowland, the home of death. We see Dingobble with 7 eyes and Sheila with eyeless face, sorcerer's patrons, and it's an odd turn to lovemaking. This one actually made me laugh out loud, though. We have The Bates, which was originally in Whisper magazine from December 1973. It's about another really short supernatural encounter like Beauty and the Beast. We also have Under the Thumbs of the Gods. I think this is from April 1975 issue of Fantastic. Wasn't 100% sure on that. It falls off from the Grey Mouser, reminiscing on past lovers at the Silver Eel while they're drinking, of course. The gods previously involved in their lives from past stories of the twain find themselves wanting some attention from the 2, specifically Isek, Kos, and Mog. It's a pretty interesting tale, but cool to see all of their lovers again in a way. Shows you how much the stories have really been about sex in some form. And it was kind of nice to reminisce. It's pretty interesting. It's again kind of Leiber's ironic take on religion as well. Then there's Trapped in the Sea of Stars, which was from the 1975 second book of Fritz Leiber. The duo they dare to try to cross the equatorial ocean. They're as fearless and foolhardy as ever, kind of idiotic, to be honest. Really gets into the makeup of the world of Newan, just how it's made up. Is it a sphere? Who knows? Anyways, of course, they're totally buffoons, so it most certainly unreliable. But it is interesting to read about anyways. This is the first decently sized one. And then we get to the last 2. So we have The Frost Monstream, is about twice the length of the previous story. It introduces the two new women. We see the great other universes and the duo finishing each other's sentences. It's the first part of the novel Rhyme Isle, which released the same year as this did, interestingly enough, in 1977. So it was... what's the word? Sorry, I'm totally blanking. Serialized, kind of, in the year before, in 76 in Flashing Swords #3, though. And then we have the Frost Monstream itself in the story is doing some great horror stuff, actually. It's a pretty interesting ship monster thing. It's pretty amazing to read, actually. I thought it was awesome. And I thought it kind of comes late into the sea adventure. It's still awesome. This tale actually seems more archaic with the language, and honestly, I read this shortly after reading Ursula K. Le Guin's From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, and I felt like Leiber was taking the criticism to heart and says, I'll show you, because I caught references to Shakespeare, even one to Robert Graves, and there's just a lot more archaism here. So that was pretty interesting as well. And then we have the last story. Rhyme Isle was published again the same year as a standalone novel. Like the previous story, here it takes place over 100 pages, so it is easily the largest. And that means it is the largest Fafhrd and Grey Mouser story as well, besides The Swords of Lankhmar, which is the 5th book, which is the only novel of the 7. Though, of course, Rhyme Isle is a novel. It's just part of Swords and Ice Magic now. So Rhyme Isle itself is compared to the island, is comparable to Greenland of the Vikings by Brian Murphy, at least in his Flame Crimson. I've also seen it compared to Iceland elsewhere, so it is something of that sort. We do actually get gods Loki and Odin here, actually. I like the story a lot. I do think in some ways, with Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stuff, I do prefer it to be shorter rather than longer. So I think the start of this novel is better than the end. Though stuff like the Frostmourne Dream is still really awesome, and there's still some pretty gnarly stuff going on in the last story. And I think here we do get an aging Leiber. This is, I believe, let's see, I think Leiber's wife died right around the time he was writing like Ilment and Lankhmar. So this is definitely an aging Leiber, though he would still be alive for about 15 more years or so. It's interesting to see how the stories change as it gets older. I know a lot of people don't actually enjoy this one as much as the previous volumes. I enjoyed it just as much as the first 5. The 7th volume is a different story, but I'll talk about that when I review that one. So, but overall, if you like D&D fiction, you have to read this, basically. Like, if you like reading like D&D fiction, there's no reason not to read this. Like, you will not regret it. These two are basically every D&D party, and they are essential reads because they are essential to what becomes D&D, essentially. And Leiber is just so good. His use of irony, his humor, but he's just he can write a badass scene as well. It's really impressive. So just, you got to pick up, whether you start with Swords and Deviltry or Swords Against Death, you just have to try this out, especially if you're a fantasy fan, I think. But even then, this is Swords and Ice Magic, and the magic is here, and it is ice magic, and there are swords. So not much to say here besides what I've already said in my other reviews for the previous books, but this stuff is awesome, and I think Leiber is underappreciated these days, at least. So, Liam Williams, Lyceum, I'll catch you next time.